Anita was a young girl in a remote African village, surrounded by dust-covered roads and faded memories of a better past. With no parents to guide her and no education to build on, she survived by working on people's farms, earning small wages that barely fed her. Her hands were hardened from digging soil, and her eyes had learned to swallow pain. Her days were filled with labor, and her nights with silence and loneliness. Life was routine, hard, and void of dreams, until her late mother's sister, Auntie Kate, arrived unannounced in a shiny car that stirred whispers among the villagers. Kate, dressed in fine city clothes and smelling of wealth, offered to take Anita to the city. It felt like a miracle. Anita believed she had been given a second chance at life, and without hesitation, she left everything behind. Arriving in the bustling city, Anita's heart swelled with excitement and confusion. Tall buildings, loud horns, bright lights, it was all new. Auntie Kate welcomed her warmly and gave her food, clothes, and a place to sleep. For a brief moment, Anita felt safe. But that comfort didn't last. Within days, the true reason for bringing her to the city was revealed. Anita was not brought to be nurtured or to be sent to school, but to join Kate's business, a trade where young girls were paid by men in exchange for their bodies. It was a world of clubs, flashing lights, heavy makeup, and broken souls. Anita refused at first. But with no money, no relatives, and no home to return to, her resistance faded. Hunger and helplessness forced her to surrender to the life she never imagined for herself. Anita's initiation into the world of paid pleasure was a night forever etched into her soul. A night she would remember, not for what was said, but for what it took from her. Auntie Kate had prepared her like a package for sale. Her hair was styled with shining beads, her lips painted in deep red, and her dress was something she would have never dared to wear back in the village. It was short, tight, and glittered under the lights of the club. She stared at herself in the mirror that night and barely recognized the girl looking back. The club was a whirlwind of noise, perfume, and false laughter. Rich men sat in corners smoking cigars and sipping champagne. Girls, some barely older than Anita, laughed loudly and danced in desperate attempts to attract attention. It wasn't joy, it was survival disguised with makeup and heels. Then he walked in, Amos. He wore a designer suit that shimmered under the club lights, his wrist adorned with a diamond-studded watch. His presence alone parted the room. Waiters straightened their backs. Girls shifted toward him like moths to a flame. Amos was no ordinary man. He was a billionaire, powerful, feared, and desired. Auntie Kate spotted him immediately. She leaned over and whispered something into the ear of a man who stood by Amos's side. Moments later, she signaled to Anita. Her heart sank. Her palms turned sweaty. But she followed. Amos barely looked at her at first. His eyes scanned the crowd with boredom until they landed on Anita's face. For a moment, their eyes met. There was a flicker of curiosity in his expression. She stood there, trying to look composed, but inside she was trembling. She had never been touched, never even kissed. Amos finally stood and motioned her to follow. They left the club and got into his black Mercedes. The car smelled of leather and power. No words were exchanged. The silence screamed louder than any conversation. Anita kept her eyes on the floor, her hands clutched together. The mansion he took her to was breathtaking. Marble floors, tall chandeliers, walls painted in gold. Yet to Anita, it felt like a prison. A beautiful trap. One that would change her forever. That night, as he undressed her without care or affection, a tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't resist. Not because she wanted it, but because she had nowhere to run. The act was quick, cold, and void of emotion. When it was over, he turned away without a word, leaving her on the bed like discarded cloth. As she lay there, staring into the darkness, she felt something inside her break. It wasn't just the pain in her body. It was the pain in her soul. The feeling of being used, devalued, emptied. She didn't sleep that night. She waited until dawn and walked back to her aunt's flat in silence. No one asked how it went. No one cared. To them, it was just business. But to Anita, it was the end of something innocent. And the beginning of something cruel. Weeks rolled by like waves crashing quietly at Anita's feet. She tried to carry on as if nothing had changed, as if the night with Amos had been just another passing storm. But her body began to tell her a different story. At first, it was the nausea, the kind that gripped her every morning like a cruel joke. Then the dizziness, the swelling of her breasts, and the heaviness in her lower back. She tried to ignore the signs, tried to believe it was just fatigue or illness from the long nights. But deep down, she knew the truth was growing inside her. One afternoon, after vomiting violently and nearly collapsing in the bathroom, she gathered enough courage to buy a pregnancy test from a small pharmacy nearby. Her hands trembled as she unwrapped the pack and followed the instructions. The tiny window on the strip slowly revealed 2 pink lines. Clear, bold, unforgiving. She stared at it for minutes, paralyzed. Pregnant. A storm of emotions flooded her chest. Confusion, shame, panic, but most of all, fear. Fear of what would come next. Of what Auntie Kate would say. Of what this meant for a girl with no family, no money, and no voice. When she finally told her aunt, the reaction was nothing short of brutal. Kate's face twisted in fury. She saw the pregnancy not as a life growing within Anita, but as a liability, an obstacle to her thriving business. Her voice was sharp and cold, cutting deeper than any blade. The solution was simple in Kate's eyes. Get rid of it. End it. Pretend it never happened. The procedure could be done quietly, discreetly, and no one would ever know. She even offered to pay for it. But Anita said no. She said no despite the trembling in her voice and the tears that poured down her cheeks. No, not because she was ready to be a mother. Not because she had the means to raise a child. But because it was the only thing in her life she still had control over. It was hers. A part of her that hadn't been forced, sold, or used. The only thing left untouched by the world's cruelty. She believed she knew who the father was. She believed the baby belonged to Amos. But she had no phone number, no address, no connection to the man who had shattered her innocence. Still, she held on to the hope that he might come back, that he might take responsibility, if not for her, then for the child. But hope is a fragile thing in a heart that's been broken too many times. Her days became longer. She stopped going to the club. Her aunt, seeing her as nothing more than a burden, distanced herself. Food became scarce. Anita sold some of the clothes Kate had once bought her to survive. She lived each day in silence, speaking only to the growing life inside her. She would place her hands on her belly and whisper promises. That she would try. That she would never abandon this child like the world abandoned her. That she would endure, even if no one else stood by her. The days grew longer, the nights colder. Anita now walked with a noticeable bump under her dress, a silent testimony to a night she wished had never happened. She often sat alone by the window of her tiny rented room, staring into the sky, hoping it would open up and give her answers. But the heavens remained quiet. Her mind was constantly at war. One part still held on to hope, that somehow Amos would remember her, take responsibility, or at least listen. The other part, the louder, crueler voice, reminded her that powerful men don't look back. That her story was just one of many. That she was nothing more than a forgotten shadow in his privileged world. But Anita couldn't let go. Not yet. Every evening, as the city lights flickered to life, she would return to the club where she first met him. She didn't have money to buy anything. She would simply stand across the street, sometimes for hours, scanning every car that pulled up, every figure that stepped out. The bouncers started recognizing her. Some mocked her. Others ignored her. But still, she came. Weeks turned into months. Then, one night, rain had just begun to drizzle, and the smell of wet asphalt filled the air. She saw it. The black Jeep. Sleek. Familiar. Her heart skipped. Her feet moved before her mind could catch up. And there he was. Amos. Still tall, still immaculate, still surrounded by laughter and friends. He looked untouched by time, as though her suffering had never existed in the same world as his. Anita gathered every bit of courage she had left and stepped forward. Her voice trembled as she called his name. He turned, slowly, with the look of someone being bothered by a stranger. She took a step closer and told him. She told him everything, about that night, the baby, the test, the loneliness, the rejection. But Amos only stared at her with cold detachment. There was no recognition in his eyes. No memory. No care. And then, he laughed. Not because he found it funny, but because he was insulted. To him, she was just another girl. Another lie. Another problem. A nuisance trying to tie him down with a fake claim. He waved his hand dismissively and called her what the world had labeled her since she entered it. A prostitute. He tossed a wad of cash at her feet. A fat bundle of naira notes bound with a rubber band. Enough to silence a poor girl. Enough to erase a mistake he refused to acknowledge. Anita didn't speak. She didn't scream. She just stood there as the rain soaked her dress and her tears blended with the water running down her face. The sound of the Jeep engine starting felt louder than thunder. And just like that, he was gone. She bent slowly, picked up the money, not out of shame, but survival. There was no pride left to protect. That night, she walked home under the rain, her body drenched, her soul crushed. Back in her room, she sat in silence for hours. She stared at the ceiling, her swollen belly rising and falling with each breath. It was over. The last shred of hope she had was gone. But something in her shifted. Amos had turned his back, the world had laughed, her aunt had abandoned her. But the life in her womb still moved. Still kicked. Still trusted her. She looked at the bundle of cash and made a decision. She would not use it to end the life inside her. She would use it to build a tiny beginning, a room, a bed, a meal. Even if it was just the two of them, she would raise this child with love, something she never truly had. Her journey had become lonelier than ever. But in that loneliness, a quiet fire burned. She was determined to live long enough to give birth to that child. Even if it killed her. Anita's life became a quiet war, one she fought daily with no army behind her. The room she rented with the money Amos threw at her was barely big enough to stretch her legs, but it was hers. The windows had no curtains, the floor was bare cement, and a single leaking ceiling bulb dangled above. Still, it was safer than her aunt's house, safer than the streets, safer than the life she'd escaped. She made do with what she had. The bundle of cash Amos gave her had quickly melted, spent on rent, a worn-out mattress, second-hand clothes, and food to last for a few weeks. No luxury, no fan, no comfort, just survival. She pawned a gold chain Kate once gifted her for a little extra money. After that, there was nothing else to sell. Each day was a slow crawl. Pregnancy weighed heavily on her small frame. Morning sickness was relentless. Her feet swelled. Her back ached. She often woke up breathless in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat and fear. She hadn't been to a hospital in weeks. She couldn't afford it. Her only medical support was memory, advice from older women in the village, and the whispers of prayer she said into her palms each morning. The isolation was suffocating. Some nights, she would lie on the floor and press her hands against her belly, talking softly to the child growing inside her. She would tell stories from the village, about mango trees, goats chasing children, and how the rain would come without warning. Her voice would crack, but she kept speaking. It gave her hope. It made her feel less alone. In a compound full of tenants, most people barely noticed her. A few looked at her with pity. Others assumed she was one of the many city girls who got careless. But there was one person who saw her, Mama Mary. Mama Mary was a widow in her 60s who sold akara and pap by the roadside just 2 streets away. She was known in the area for her thick wrappers, tired eyes, and big heart. The first time she noticed Anita, the girl was crouched behind a wooden kiosk, crying quietly and clutching her stomach. From that day, Mama Mary began sending her small plates of food, leftover akara, warm pap, sometimes a small yam porridge when business was good. She never asked for anything in return. She didn't pry. She just gave. Her kindness was the only warmth Anita knew in that season. The two grew close, slowly. Sometimes Anita would sit beside Mama Mary's stand and watch her fry akara. The smell would mix with the dust and sweat of the streets, and somehow, It reminded her of the village. Mama Mary became the only person Anita trusted enough to confide in. She told her everything, about Kate, about Amos, about the night she found out she was pregnant, and about the baby that kicked more each day. Mama Mary listened without judgment. She didn't offer pity, just strength, soft, motherly strength. She reminded Anita that she was still alive, still capable, still valuable, even in her pain. But as her due date approached, Anita's body began to show signs of strain. Her legs couldn't carry her far anymore. Her face became pale, her eyes tired. She had never been to a real prenatal checkup. The fear of labor haunted her. But more than that, she feared what would happen to the child if she didn't survive. One afternoon, as she lay on the floor, too weak to sit up, she whispered to herself the same thing she had every night for months. Just let me make it long enough to hold him once. The lonely fight continued, but she was determined to keep going. For the child who had become her only reason to live. The night Anita went into labor, the sky wept with her. Heavy rain slammed against the rusty rooftops of the compound. Thunder rumbled through the sky like a warning from the gods, and the air was thick with the smell of wet dust and sorrow. Inside her dimly lit room, Anita lay curled on a thin mattress soaked in sweat and blood. The contractions had started slowly hours before, tightening like ropes around her belly. But now, they came in waves, sharp and unbearable, robbing her of breath, bending her body in pain she had never known. Her screams were muffled by the rain, swallowed by the storm. She was alone. The neighbors stayed indoors, unconcerned, unaware, or perhaps just unwilling to get involved. Her voice was fading. Her strength was gone. She tried to stand, but her legs buckled. Her fingers clawed at the floor. Then she remembered Mama Mary. With her last bit of strength, Anita reached for a stick she kept near her door and banged it on the metal gate, again and again, until the sound sliced through the rain. Mama Mary heard it. She rushed out barefoot, clutching her wrapper, and burst into Anita's room. What she saw froze her in place. Blood between the young girl's legs, a pale face drenched in tears, eyes wide with terror. Without wasting time, she wrapped Anita in a faded shawl and called for help. But help didn't come. No taxi, no bike, no neighbor. Everyone was hiding from the storm. There was no choice. In the pouring rain, Mama Mary placed Anita on the back of her old bicycle, the one she used to carry her akara basket, and pedaled into the storm. Her slippers slipped. Her wrapper tore. But she didn't stop. The wind slapped her face, and the rain blinded her, but she pushed through the dark streets, whispering prayers through trembling lips. By the time they reached the small local clinic, Anita's body was already limp. Nurses rushed to her, shouting orders, lifting her onto the delivery bed. The generator buzzed weakly as the dim bulb flickered above them. Mama Mary stood outside the room, drenched, shaking, whispering every prayer she knew. Inside, Anita was slipping. She could feel it. Her body was giving up. Her vision was blurring, her ears ringing. But even in her fading moments, her mind stayed on one thing, her baby. She had carried him through shame, through hunger, through loneliness. She had endured the mockery, the rejection, the silence of the world. She had no family, no home, no wealth. But she had loved this child with everything she had. Her final thought, her final breath, was for him. And then, silence. Anita's chest rose one last time, then never again. Just minutes after Anita's soul slipped away, the room echoed with a piercing cry, the unmistakable sound of life. A baby boy, tiny and trembling, was placed into clean cloth. His eyes squinted against the light, his fists clenched tightly, as though he already understood the battle his mother had fought for him. The nurse stepped out, tears in her eyes, and looked at Mama Mary. She didn't make it, but the baby did. Mama Mary staggered backward, clutching her heart. But then she moved forward, arms open, and took the child into her embrace. He was warm, fragile, and breathing, just like Anita had prayed he would. As thunder rolled one last time in the distance, Mama Mary wrapped him in her shawl and whispered, "You will live, my child." For her. For Anita.